Hello and welcome to this episode of the WILL podcast. I'm so happy to be here today with Marni Blank. And Marni is an end-of-life doula, a recovering lawyer, and more. And we're going to have an incredible conversation. I've been so excited to talk with you, Marni, and holding back all the questions when we had our get to know each other a little bit conversation. And I just shared with Marni that I often start WILL calls with a little grounding. And she said, yeah, let's do it. So we're going to start this conversation with a little deep breath. So if you're not driving or operating heavy machinery and it feels good to you, I invite you to put your left hand on your heart and your right hand on top of it. And just take this moment to take a deep breath. If you're anything like me, you listen to podcasts on, at least 1.25 or 1.5 speed. But this is just a moment to remember you're alive. And I think we're going to be talking a lot about that today. So to take a sec to recognize the miracle that is your human life, that is this human existence with all the ups and downs. But to slow down for just a sec. You're here for a reason, both here on planet Earth and listening to this podcast for a reason. So just tune in to yourself. And I invite you to think about what would you like to get from this conversation. And this will prime your brain to pick up something of use. So make the decision you are getting something useful from this chat, even if none of us know what it's going to be just yet. So with that, take a last deep breath. All right. So Marni.
I feel so much more grounded.
Beautiful. That's how I start all our coaching calls, our group calls inside of WILL. So happy to have you experience that a little bit. Take us back to, you said you're a recovering lawyer, you have a business called Begin with the End, and take us back to how you became a lawyer and a little bit about your kind of early lawyer life.
Yeah, it's funny. It started before I went to law school. I'd finished college and I would be home at my parents having dinner, and they would casually invite their lawyer friends who were no longer lawyers over to the dinner table and would drop into conversation why they were no longer practicing law and all the reasons why it wasn't ended up being for them. And I took all that in and went to law school anyway, but it was very kind of my parents to try to look out for me. But I ended up going to law school at Brooklyn Law, 2007 to 2010. And before that, I was a legal assistant in SCAD and ARPS for 2 years. And that didn't dissuade me either. I knew I didn't want to be in big law, but I knew that I still wanted to be in law. So anyway, I graduated and ended up working for a federal judge for 3 years. And then I moved over to New York City Housing Authority doing labor and employment law. And it was there sitting in my windowless office, contemplating what I was doing. It was a place, although I had great colleagues, didn't have a lot of resources. And I had a plant on my desk, tried to make my desk very cute, and had a snake plant on my desk. And it's supposed to survive literally anything. It's supposed to survive drought and lack of sun. It was dying. I started to be like, if this plant is dying and it needs light, something else that this place isn't providing, I think that's also the case for me. I ended up saving up money and renting out my apartment and doing my little eat, pray, love around the world when I quit that job. And I did that for about 7 months till I ran out of funds, and I came back and I was like, uh-oh, what is next for me?
So what was next for you? Yeah.
What was next was that, as you probably know, when you are a lawyer, you can get a real estate license without having to do all of the exams. And I ended up working for a real estate startup for about a year, learned a lot. It was a very high stress, high paced environment as well, without a lot of boundaries. And I was like, okay, this is probably not for me either. And at the same time, my sister was very disillusioned with what she was doing at the time in the city as well. She was a designer for a clothing brand, and it was also just not what she was wanting to do. And she asked me if I would, because I was in real estate, if I could look for spaces for her to see if there was a photography space available that she could run. I was looking for her just to help her out. And then she came to me and said, this is actually something that we should do together. We should have an event space and a photo studio. You can be doing operations. You're good with logistics. You're good with research. You can hold things together. And she could be design director. And so we ended up partnering together and keeping that business going for 8 years.
Do you still have that? The studio, right? In Soho, do you still have it?
I do have it. We are letting go of the studio at the end of the year when our lease is up because both of us are ready after 8 years to be focusing on the next things. And for me, it's being full-time in the end of life space, which is, I know, what we're going to be focusing on today. But that is my very roundabout way.
I love it. I'm curious, what made you, even though your parents were like trying to dissuade you from going to law school and bring these folks around to educate you, what made you want to go to law school anyway?
I think part of it was, why would my parents ever be right about anything when I was in my early 20s? That was part of it. But also, I grew up in a household where the law was very much revered and respected. My grandfather was a labor attorney during the 1940s and 50s, during the Red Scare. He worked for the government, and it was something that was really important to our family history. And so I also felt like it was an honoring of him to be going into the profession. And those were some of the reasons.
Okay, fascinating. And I'm curious also about making money, right? It's one of the things, especially with women who leave the practice and like a steady paycheck. I mean, you were clerking and then working for New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, which is not like, you couldn't be making huge money there, right? And then you went and traveled, sort of piecing it together with real estate and growing your end of life business. If you're comfortable speaking about that, I think it's helpful for people. They're always like, I can't make a change because of the money.
It is a real fear. The golden handcuffs are a real thing. And I just have to say that, well, I know it's easier said than done, but like money isn't everything. My time, my flexibility, and my mental health were far more important to me than the paycheck. And I was willing to take that leap because of that. It was scary. You know, at first, I made good money when I was in real estate, and I saved up while I was doing that for whatever that next chapter was. So, you know, sometimes there are bridge jobs in between what it is we're meant to do and the thing that we're leaving behind. And I think that that is totally fine. Like the next step after the thing that you're leaving doesn't have to be the end all be all. Sometimes you just need to take that leap. And I needed to prove to myself that I could take that leap. But starting off as an entrepreneur was really difficult. The buck stops with me, and it was scary and stressful. I mean, surviving a pandemic, doing all of it, being in business for 8 years, like if I can do it, anyone can. Like I didn't have any more experience in business than anyone else who went to law school, but I feel like there was so much that I learned in law and in law school that continues to help me. I don't regret at all. I don't regret, going to law school. I don't regret being a lawyer. I think that's gotten to me where I am today, but I take the parts that I want.
That's definitely something I really want to hold up under a microscope for our listeners also. What were some of the kind of core thoughts as you were leaving the practice of law to more go out onto your own, into more entrepreneurial ventures?
I mean, the first thoughts were like, how could I possibly leave law? I spent so much time and money on my education. Was this all for naught? Those were kind of like the fear things that were keeping me in a place that I wasn't happy with. And I really had to work on how to shift, like how I was thinking about things to realize that it was exactly what I needed and it's on the right path of what I want to be doing. And I didn't exactly know what I wanted to be doing. I only knew that I didn't want to be doing what I was doing, but also feeling confident that I'm smart. I am able to research. I mean, if law school teaches you nothing else, it's like, how can I figure out what it is that I don't know? And that's really the main thing that I take with me in everything. I don't know everything, but I know how to figure things out, or I know how to ask people who can help me understand what I don't know.
I love that. I've never heard it articulated in that exact way, but I think that's really spot on. Like you become an excellent problem solver, not just issue spotter, but like problem solver and like figuring things out.
Yeah. And it was also fascinating to go into business with someone who is just just a creative mind. Like my sister and I are completely different personalities. Like you're saying, I'm risk averse. I'm thinking 5 steps ahead to my anxiety of, what can go wrong and, all these things. And that is good as a business owner, but it's also good to be balanced out by the other side to be like, well, what if it's all okay? What if the worst case scenario isn't the thing that's going to happen? And that's been a huge learning experience for me.
That's great. So you're doing real. You came back from your Eat, Pray, Love trip around the world. And by the way, I'm a huge Elizabeth Gilbert fan, just so you know. Today at this event I went to, they said like on our name tags, they had us like your first name or your name. And then they said a visionary who inspires you. And I wrote Elizabeth Gilbert. So you came back from this trip, you're doing real estate, you start the studio with your sister. And then how did you get into being a death doula? Take us into that.
At an event that we were hosting at the studio, just living my life. And I got a call from a hospital out of state that my mom had been in a freak car accident. And the first things that popped into my mind, besides the fact that, is she okay? It was, oh my gosh, I have her power of attorney sitting on my desk that I was supposed to get notarized that I did not. And that had been sitting in my desk for months, literally just collecting dust. And it's not because I'm not smart. I'm an attorney. I understand how important these things are. And I was completely paralyzed by or blocked around dealing with paperwork that had to do with my mom's death. And I didn't do it. And in that moment of needing to get to Massachusetts, I had to go scramble, find a notary and do that. And I'll fast forward that my mom is okay. But in the ensuing months of figuring out a rehabilitation center, dealing with pets, she had just gotten a cat the day before, a week before, a kitten, and she had a dog. Her mail, taking care of, all of the things was completely overwhelming. I felt very alone and overwhelmed and just in logistics mode. And when you're in logistics mode, you cannot be present. You cannot just be the daughter. You can't be in grief, even if it's not leading to a death. And if you were in grief, if you were just paralyzed in grief, it is incredibly hard to be dealing with paperwork or logistics. And so it really got me thinking about caregiving, about, the fact that I'm of an age where my parents are getting older, they're having accidents. And so is that with a lot of my friends. And how can I feel more prepared going forward in this? And so I ended up going to death doula training in 2020 through a program called Going with Grace.
Did you start it after the pandemic, or did you start in January or February? Wow.
I started June. It was really a time, and the whole world was in grief. It was in grief over death. It was grief over loss of income. It was grief of losing jobs or a future that, loss of relationships. There were so many things that people were grieving in that moment. It was an interesting time to be focused on it. And death doulas are really dealing with the emotional, the practical, and the spiritual aspects of death, dying, and grief. And a lot of what I do is educate people around this, but I also do a lot of practical things because I'm a lawyer. So a lot of what I do is helping people think about their planning in advance. So a lot of people think that it's just, basic estate plans, but that's really not all that there is. We all have a huge digital life now. And what is your digital life organized? Is it a mess? Where is your important paperwork? It's thinking about end of life wishes and how are we having these conversations with our elders to make sure that everything is taken care of. So it's both intergenerationally and for ourselves that we need to be thinking about this. So a lot of what I do is that.
So do all death doulas do all that kind of planning and organizing stuff? Or is that because you are practical, kind of pragmatic, seems like you're good with operational things. Is that something that's in your practice, but it might not be in someone else's death doula practice?
It's definitely not in every death doula's practice. When people think death doulas, they think solely sitting bedside at the end, holding vigil with a family. And I do that, but it's not everything I do. And I would say that some doulas only focus on, the respite care for the families and the dying at the very end. Some do pre-planning in the sense of they will help people with advanced directives or, really kind of honing in on the end of life wishes. Not everyone kind of thinks more holistically about the other aspects that need to really be fleshed out in order for people to be prepared and to leave their loved ones with a gift instead of a disaster.
Yeah, totally. So on one of our group calls the other day, and someone had texted me ahead of time, let me know that her father was dying. And I said, of course, don't if you can't get on the call, like she did get on the call, and she shared on the call that she had, and this is like one of the most heart-wrenching parts of it was, she's like, yeah, I just bought my father's funeral plot. I just felt so much for her, like to be in that moment where she's trying to be present with her family. And, she's the lawyer daughter. She's the one who takes care of them. She takes care of everything. And to have to be taking care of that kind of detail, like the day your father is passing, seemed very heart-wrenching. And I just wanted to care for her, like as the daughter, to just like grieving who's saying goodbye.
Absolutely. It's so hard to be thinking practically in a moment where everything else is falling apart. Like that is not the time to be. We're not making our most rational decisions in that moment. We are not thinking through all of the things. We're just kind of on autopilot. And there are so many decisions that one as a family can make in advance, so that in that moment, all you have to do is show up or follow the directions of what has been laid out ahead of time. And just like you're saying, at that point, then you can be the daughter, then you can be the son, then you can just be the person who just lost someone, instead of planning a full funeral in under a week, which, let me tell you, is a real challenge.
Would you be comfortable sharing an example of like a family or someone you worked with who, and kind of the impact that your work had for them?
Yeah, I mean, I just lost a client in September who we had been working together for 6 months. He had a neurological disease akin to ALS that was just devastating, just really slowly you just lose all the function. He was incredibly smart, a professor, and he knew what was happening. And so he hired me because he didn't have family who he felt could show up for him in that moment. And his best friend was doing most of the work. And as an act of love, he didn't want to leave all of this for his friend to figure out. And so we did practical things. We created a contact list. We went through his phone and we made a phone tree of who he wanted contacted after he died and who might want to be the leaders of the phone tree to make arrangements to let them know about the funeral. We prepaid for his funeral and the plot and made all the arrangements. I was the point person for the funeral so that if there were any disagreements or questions, they were for me, and so that there was no infighting between any of the family, and that the best friend and the family could just show up and be present, and that they knew that someone was handling everything for them. Yeah, I mean, and I'm still in touch with his family. We're still in contact, and it's just a gift to be thinking ahead of what can you take off your family's plate. A lot of what I do is handling the logistics and the paperwork after a death. People don't think about it, but so many of us, especially the lawyer daughters, are named executors. And oftentimes we're told, oh, by the way, you're my executor. Well, what does that mean? What are the hours involved? Is it my strong suit? And so are you having these conversations within families? But oftentimes I'm working with the family to do all of that paperwork and logistics after a death so that they don't have to go through it alone.
What would you say? Many of the women I work with are in kind of that sandwich era in their life where they're definitely caring for elderly parents and maybe children. And so what would you recommend for someone who's like listening to this and might want to, have a conversation with their parents or just kind of prepare themselves a little bit more, either for a loved one's death and then I've got some questions about like for me, like I'm single now out of my long-term marriage. I have kids, but they're in their 20s and I don't want to leave them a mess, and like my mom, actually, I remember she prepaid for her cremation and she had made those arrangements and I was so grateful, and I have a brother who's very competent and, is like a CFO. So he was handling all the details, but like, what can we do either, if we're thinking about our loved ones or we're thinking about, as we age, making it easier for our loved ones too?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And there are so many people in the sandwich generation and just more and more who are going to be both caregivers for their children and their, elderly parents. And it's really just starting to have this conversation. A lot of people aren't taught to be talking about death or asking these sort of very personal questions. So it doesn't come naturally to everyone. And I think that we need to normalize that it's very taboo in our society, just like talking about money. It can be very uncomfortable. But the more that we start to just open that door even a little bit, it's going to take several talks. This is not like a one and done conversation. And so if you're shut down, I would just encourage you to just be talking about it more. And it can be like, I'm thinking about my own planning. I'm curious, do you have your important documents somewhere that I should know about? If something were to happen, is there an attorney that you've worked with? Just starting to gather information slowly, casually to kind of put together. And some families are much more comfortable or have shared this information. And some people are very closed about it. There's a great resource on the internet called the Conversation Project that sort of helps people start to have these conversations. And I also love to use this thing called the Death Deck.
The Conversation Project and the Death Deck.
And the Death Deck asks lots of different questions just to sort of be icebreakers, but kind of makes it a little more casual, a little more gamified, but in a very loving way. And it can just be a way to be like, oh, this is a question I haven't thought about, and to bring it up. And so that's the way I would start to have conversations with our elders about it, but really just making it about you. Yeah. Making it about I'm worried. I want to be able to follow your wishes. I just want to make sure that I feel prepared. You don't have to give me the information now if you don't want to in terms of the physical documents, but where can I find it if I need it? That's really important. For us, who are not quite there yet, now is a great time to be doing your own planning, whether it's updating your accounts. I had a client who, when we were working together, I asked her to check on her TODs, her transfer on deaths, her beneficiaries for her bank accounts and her investment accounts. And she realized that several of them, her ex-fiance was named on those accounts still, that they hadn't been transferred. And so it's these kind of things, how can we just make it a regular thing to make sure that our documents are updated to the appropriate beneficiaries, to start getting your important documents in a centralized location, whether it's in your home in a fireproof safe or it's in a digital vault, which I highly recommend also. Having both, I think, is great.
Having both. And so, a digital vault for passwords, things like that. I imagine there's a lot to organize digitally.
The average person has 240 online accounts, and that's, I think, a lower estimate of what people have. And so really checking, what do you have? What's out there? If someone were to have to walk into your life, would they know where your bank accounts and investment accounts are? What subscriptions do you have that are recurring that you want to make sure that someone understands?
And so people probably hire you to also just help them get that organized, because just hearing about that to me, I'm a little avoidant of tasks like that. That's not I need a deadline. I need a coach, that's how I'm wired. Some people are much more efficient at those things. So I imagine do you actually sit down with people and go through that and help them get it really organized?
Yes, I do that a lot. Like you're saying, a lot of people just need an accountability partner to have deadlines, to have homework assignments, and to have someone who can also help actually set up a digital vault if you need one, or just an organization system. That's not for everyone, and it's okay. But I also want to say, instead of feeling overwhelmed, it is really that progress over perfection. Whatever you do, whatever that step is a good step. It doesn't need to be everything.
Progress, not perfection, is definitely a huge thing I talk about with my clients also. It's all about progress, right? You're making progress towards something, and it's becoming the person who is not avoidant, right? Who's dealing with the thing, whether it's figuring out how to leave law for something that is a better fit, or getting your digital files and life in order.
Yeah. And once you start to do things towards your goal, whether it's quitting or leaving the law or doing something with your end of life planning, it really makes it lighter and it makes it feel much more manageable. It doesn't need to be leaping tomorrow. It can just be taking the steps of what's bringing me joy right now. Or it really is just little steps. And then it just feels much more manageable.
Yeah, that's what I say too. It's not people think it's jumping off a cliff. I have to do it all at once. It's like, no, you actually take small steps. It's like leaping over little puddles instead of like jumping off a cliff. And then you find you're in new territory. How do you feel like your lawyer skills? I mean, it seems like I can think of a million ways, but I'm curious, and for you, how do you feel like your lawyer skills, your lawyer training serves you so well in your business, especially in this particular business?
Well, certainly a lot of what I do is researching individual clients' cases. Like everyone has something different that they're coming to the table with. And a lot of it is researching and, asking the right questions of the internet or making the call to the customer service person and, being able to sound authoritative in the right way. But a lot of it is sort of that logistical thinking, asking like the three questions ahead so that you don't have to come back and ask and ask and ask, but like, what's the goal here? And then what am I trying to get the information for is a lot of it. I think, I'm able to, when people know that I am a lawyer, because, I'm never going to give up my law degree. Like work too hard, keep those CLEs going. But, I feel like it's important to have that people know that because they feel more comfortable asking me questions. And I can sort of give them information on the estate planning process. I'm not, drafting the documents for them, but can I speak about what they need to be thinking about in a way that feels approachable? Yes. And they feel more confident in how to approach it because I'm showing up with that knowledge.
Of course. I think it's like a huge boon for you in this field that you're a lawyer and like you have this attention to detail, kind of the gravitas of the command of being able to really counsel and give people advice in this very important area where they want things done right. So there aren't legal questions.
Yeah. And it's also being able to network in a way that I know that the people that I'm referring them to in terms of drafting those documents or the financial planner, that I feel comfortable giving those. And I feel like I am able to vet that based on the fact that I'm coming to it from a peer perspective as opposed to someone else who doesn't necessarily know what to be asking. So that's also helpful.
Are there any other things that you would like someone, like a lawyer who is thinking about making a career change into something non-traditional, into something, maybe more entrepreneurial, or just into like the next thing? Is there anything from your own experience that you would want another woman lawyer who's thinking about making a change to know?
I think it's really just about being curious about what is like driving you and following those. Like my path has not been straight. It has been very windy. And like, I think that one could put a lot of judgment on themselves if they haven't quite figured it out yet. And I think just being patient and knowing that like everything is leading to the right place. It might not be happening in the time frame that we expected it to be, but I'm so grateful for my law degree and my jobs in law and figuring out what I didn't like and then being floundering for a bit. I definitely floundered. I will admit it. And then figuring out what it is that brought me that joy, or at least brought me like that, ooh, I know that I'm going in the right direction. So I think just being very patient with yourself and also just, reaching out to other people who changed careers or changed jobs and having those just conversations, because it's less scary when you know that other people have done it and haven't like been in the streets. Like you're smart, you're come with a degree. Like what is the worst that could happen? Really? What is the actual worst thing that can happen?
I mean, for most of my people, they say like, I've got to get another legal job. Like that's like the worst thing while they're figuring it out, right? Or taking some kind of bridge job or do some gig legal work or do some real estate, like you did. There's so many things that they can do in the interim.
It's also just like, what are you willing to put up with? Life is short. If I have learned nothing from what I have been doing is that life is short and unpredictable. And so why wait?
I love that. I think that's really, really poignant. I was telling Marni before we started recording that I went to something today called Creative Mornings. The speaker, one of the first things he said was life is short, make great art, but definitely make art. And I think make art of your life really is what I'm into doing.
I love that.
Life is incredibly, incredibly short. recently I went to synagogue and I was sitting in front of a family and we were chatting. The mom had 2 little boys. And I have 2 sons who are in college now. And it's just like, it goes so fast. How does it affect your life and how you appreciate life?
I mean, it definitely does. I think that I'm far more open about talking about these things with my parents, with my sister, with all of my friends will now just like send me articles or podcasts. And I love it because I think that I'm not willing to waste my time now. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to like binge watch something on Netflix, but like I'm much more attuned to the fact that how many more summers do I have left that I'm going to be able-bodied? I want to make the most of them. I want to travel. I want to like love. I want to create art. And I want to be doing something day to day that brings me meaning because I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. And so it's definitely affects all areas of my life, but it also, I think, has affected in a good way how my parents feel comfortable talking about these things with me. We have had many important conversations that have led to really like fun things. Like speaking about art, my dad paints in his free time, has hundreds of paintings in the basement, like these geometric, very colorful art. And we're like, what are we going to do with this? And so together as a family, we came up that like when he dies at his funeral, everyone gets to choose a piece of his art to take home. And like, that's something that will take something off of my plate, but also is just something beautiful for people to remember him by. So one could think that that's morbid, but I think it's beautiful that like they feel comfortable having these sort of real conversations with me.
That's a beautiful, beautiful way to honor him and to share him with the people who love him also. So Marni, what would, if somebody wants to work with you, reach out to you, what's the next step and how do you work with people just at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, I have, on my website, there are a few just like free offerings. There are, getting your important documents and digital life organized checklist, or there is something on legacy projects. I really am a big believer in creating legacy projects for our elders. I work with people one-on-one in terms of getting organized or with people who are actively dying or have an estate that need help with. And so my website is beginwiththeend.co. And my Instagram is beginwith_the_end. And people are welcome. I can give you my email. People are welcome to email me, ask questions. If you just want to have a conversation, I'm open to chatting with anyone. I really feel like everyone should be able to get educated and feel more comfortable talking about something that's kind of uncomfortable.
Thank you so much. I think having those conversations with people who are doing it, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I think those 2 things, like being able to actually talk to lawyers who've made a change, who are doing something different, and hearing the stories of like, wow, she went from like clerking to like a death doula. It's very beautiful and it's really important. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your story. I'll make sure all your website, all those things get into our show notes, along with the conversation project, the death deck, and I will definitely be myself checking out your checklist because I want it because I'm working with a financial coach and I've talked with her about like, we're going to meet with my kids together and like, I want to leave things in a good way for them. And I want to know that they don't have to like, God forbid I die young, like deal with stuff and try and figure out my disorganized digital life.
No, I love that. That's so great that you're including your children in it at this point. They may or may not appreciate it in this moment, but I promise you that they will appreciate it later.
I think it's very beautiful. I mean, even just in thinking about our conversation today, I just was like, wow, we are alive. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a beautiful day.